kind of a new topic. Rabba says, Mechorli Be'elu, I have a handful of coins, and I say to somebody, sell this to me for the money in my hand, but nobody's counted the money, right? So kind then the buyer gets that affects the and you hand over the coins. Then that's a kinyan. So obviously it's a kinyan chalipin because you didn't actually take the object. That's not what we're referring to here. But the amount of money matters in the sense that you can't overcharge, right? So if it turns out that it was too much money by over a sixth is the rule, then you have a claim of overcharging. So Konagav the Lomashach. So the kinyan takes place, the acquisition takes place, even though you didn't take the item, didn't take possession of it. The kevin copied, since you're not particular about the money, the amount of money, kana the chalipin dami. It's like a chalipin, right? It's like you don't care how much money is there. You're just doing an exchange using the kinyan chalipin mechanism. So it doesn't matter if you picked up the object. But why do you have a claim of overcharging? Because you referred to the money in your hand, right? It's like so it's kind of a hybrid. It's kind of a little bit of both. It works like a chalipin, but it's still a monetary transaction. Rav Abba Amar Rav Huna, Rav Abba says a different version. Mecharli be'elu, that Rav Huna says that if you have that same case, kana ve'ein lo alavana. It's a total chalipin, right? There's a kinyan and there's no overcharging because you're not selling it on account of the value of the coins. You're doing a chalipin, which is just the objects that you're taking possession of the money that stands in for the object that you're buying. So there's no basis for a claim of overcharging. It doesn't matter how much money there was there for a kinyan chalipin. So Pshita damim v'en makpid aleim. So it's obvious that the case where you're really not caring about how much money there is, hakamrina dekane de chalipin dam. So that's a clear kinyan chalipin. Chalipin umakpid aleim mai. But what if it's a case of chalipin, but you care about what you're doing the chalipin with? Like, I don't want to do the kinyan chalipin with your big pen. I want to do it with something more substantial. So does that make a difference, right? Is it a valid chalipin or not if you care about what object is being used as the stand-in? Amar Ravada Barava, Tashma. Ravada brings a proof. Harishaya Tofes Paraso Valmid. You're standing there with your cow. Lama, why'd you bring your cow to the marketplace? You say, because I wanted to exchange it for a donkey. What do you know? I have a donkey. Let's exchange. How much is your cow worth? It's worth $1,000. How much is your a donkey worth? My donkey is worth $700. And they agreed to make the trade. Mashach bal chamar sapara. Once the other guy, the guy who has the donkey, once he takes possession of the cow, I didn't yet take the donkey, and the donkey drops dead. Lo kanabal chamar sapara. Then the exchange is nullified, right? He doesn't get the cow. Shmamina. So what do we see from this? Chalipin umakpil and lokana. Looks like I care about the I care about the value that I'm getting from it, right? Because it's clearly a kinyan chalipin, and I care about the value. Rava says no. Atu chalipin b'shuftene askin lokapte. Like in a regular, like in any case of chalipin, like, are we dealing with idiots who don't care about the value? We assume that in every case of chalipin, we care about the value of the item. So what are we talking about in this price? So why is it that the kinyan is not affected? The brisa left something out, right? The donkey is only worth 700, so I'm not going to exchange that. You got to throw in the sheep for 300, right? But the sheep's not here, right? So we agreed to an exchange of a cow for a donkey and a sheep. You took possession of the donkey, you took possession of the cow, but I'm sorry, I said it wrong. It's the donkey is more valuable. So you have to not only do I have to come up with the cow, but I have to come up with the cow and the lamb, right? So I handed over the cow. The guy took the cow, but he didn't yet take the rest of the transaction, the rest of the lamb. He didn't take yet. So then he didn't take full possession of his side of the deal, right? He only took the cow. He didn't take the sheep. So that's why if the donkey drops dead, then the whole thing is canceled because the even if it's Khalifin, it hasn't been totally effective yet. Okay, so Amar, we said before, so one view before was that if I say here, take the coins in my hand, and sell me that item. So then there's still one view was that there's a issue of overcharging, right? If if the price was too high. So it looks like we're talking about coins, right? The Brisa said you have a handful of coins. So it looks like, according to Rav Huna, who's the source of these of this dictum, that coins, if I hand, like you might say that if I hand over coins, it's not chalipin, it's a monetary transaction, and you have to do meshicha or some other form of kinyan. So it looks like by saying that that by expressing the rule in this brisa, Rav Huna is saying that you can use coins as chalipin, doesn't matter what the value is. Mar says, not necessarily. Rafina several like Rabbi Yochanan. Maybe Rafina holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Diamar Dvar Torah Mos Kanats. That money, just handing over money, can be a kinyan for metaltalin, for movable objects. Why do they institute? Why do the rabbis institute that there has to be an act of acquisition like Mashicha? Because the rabbis were concerned that the seller might say to the buyer, "Oh, we made this deal, but your wheat then got burned, right? It went up in flames." So milsa de shlicha. So that's why we have a requirement of mashicha, right? So mina Torah, midoraisa, you don't need mashicha at all, right? Once you hand over the money, the transaction works. But the rabbi said, you know what? Let's wait until he takes possession. But milsa the shchicha gozer barabanan. When did they institute this safeguard? In a normal case, right? Milsa the lo shchicha lo gozer barabanan. If it's a weird case like this case of the guy who says, here's a bunch of coins, I'm buying your thing, and nobody bothered to count the coins, that's a weird thing. So they're not going to institute their takana that there has to be Mashiach. So that's why. So we go back to the Torah rule, which it doesn't really need to be Mashiach in the first place. Amalei Marhuna Bereder of Nachman Ravashi Atun Hachim Masnisula. Marhuna says you learned Rav Huna's view this way. Anan Hachim Masnisula. This is how I interpret it. V'chein Amar Rav Huna Ein Mapei Nasa Chalipin. And Rav Huna also said, or of course, accordingly said, "Ein mabena chalipin." You can't use coins as chalipin. So yeah, and so in other words, he's confirming more explicitly that the issue here is not matbea nasa chalipin, right? That's not necessarily the case, but even when you say that coins can't be used as chalipin, here it still works because it's an unusual case. So the rabbis let you revert to the biblical rule, which is you don't need to take possession.
In the beginning of the Mishnah, when we started the Mishnah, like two dafim ago, it was the case was gold for silver, basically. But in almost every case, which we discussed, we said the Mashiach was necessary. Transferring the money did not acquire the object. Person had to acquire the object itself in order. Where if he just transferred the money, they could renege the deal. But once the person acquired the object, you can't go back on the deal. So how are we saying now that that Mashiach is not necessary?
No, we're saying it's necessary, but only to drop on. So the Mishnah is saying this is the actual real world rule because the rabbis instituted there has to be Mashiach, right? But now we're saying that maybe, that's only in a normal case, but in a weird case where I'm selling you something for an indeterminate number of coins, then you could actually do it without Mashiach. So that doesn't affect all the rules that apply to a normal case.
This also helps resolve another problem, which is that coins cannot possibly be Deraita because coins didn't exist at the time of Matan Torah.
Oh, yeah, I figured something about that. Okay. How do you explain the shekel then? That's referred to in the building of the Mishkan.
Shekel is a weight. And kesef literally means, which is used to refer to money, simply means silver.
A measure of silver. Okay. Okay. Speaking of coins, Bama konim. No, sorry, we're not up to the coins yet. Hang on. Coins are coming. Bama konim. What do you use for this kinyan sudar? What do you use for it? Rav Amar bechelyo shel kona. You use a kli, a utensil of the buyer. The nichale lekona deleve makna kona. It's because the buyer. It's good for the buyer that the seller should get that whatever handkerchief or whatever you're using, so that he will agree to the transaction. No, Levi says use the utensil of the seller. As we're going to explain in a minute. According to Levi, who says it's the seller's item that you use for kinyan sudar, you're allowing the acquisition of land through this acquiring the whatever, the handkerchief. So that is a situation where real property, for which there can be a lien, can be acquired together with the movable property, right, which has no lien. But we have a Mishnah that opposes that, right? So if it's the same guy that's handing over the land and the instrument of possession, then those two are linked. Then the land and the movable object are acquired at the same time. But the Mishnah says that you can only lump together lienable property or non-lienable property. You can't mix them together. So how do you explain the idea that it is that the seller hands over both the land and the movable object that's used for chalipin at the same time? So he answers, Ihava Levi Hachaf. Levi were here, he would answer, Have a mapik la'apach pulse denura. He would have shot fire at you. Misavras glima maknale. You think that it's the handing over of the handkerchief that's affecting the transfer of property. It's not the item itself, it's the hana that the buyer accepts the gift of the handkerchief. That is what the buyer is giving to the seller. He's giving him his gratitude, let's say, okay, his appreciation. And that is what affects the transfer of the land. So the buyer gives the seller his appreciation. The seller gives the buyer the land. And the passing of the handkerchief is, Charlie, are you speaking? You're on mute. The transaction is affected not by the handkerchief itself, but by the appreciation that the buyer gives the seller when he receives the gift, the handkerchief.
So what happened in the case with the chamor and the para? Well, was there a handkerchief? Was there land involved? It just seemed like they were transferring a barter, exchanging the cow for the chamor.
Correct. There, we're not talking about land, right? But now we're saying we're taking a step back and looking a little more broadly at the whole idea. And if chalipin works for land, how does it work, right? So yeah, you're correct that when we're just talking about metalflin, it doesn't really matter.
So what was the object? What was the object of a chalifin in that case?
Case of the cow.
Cow and the chamor. What was it?
Yes.
There was was there a handkerchief? Was there a cloak? Was there land?
No. The chamor served as the chalipin.
Uh-huh.
But there was no real property there.
Oh, so the chamor
Okay.
was the object of chalifin. Okay.
Okay, and Ketanai, the Gemara says this argument between Rav and Levi is a machlokas Tanai. Those lefanim Yisrael al gula val tmura l'kaim kol davar shalafish nalov and nasan l'reya, the pasuk in Ruth, which states that this was the way things were done. In order to effect transactions, one party would take off their shoe and give it to the other, right? Geula zumachira. So what is this? Al hageula vel tmura. Geula is a sale. V'chein hu amar lo yigael, as the Torah talks about in terms of property, going back to its owner. It can't be, will not be redeemed, and that means it won't be sold. And Tamura zu chalipin, an exchange. Tamura means an exchange. That's a chalipin. So either in a sale or a chalipin exchange, the practice was to hand over a shoe. So this is a pasuk that links Tamura, the word Yamir, when it comes to Kodshim, like you can't exchange it. So linking the words Lahamir and Lachlif means that Chalipin is an exchange, right? So anyway, so Lakaim Kodavar Shalaf Ishnalov and the Salareo. So in order to confirm either a sale or an exchange, you'd hand over your shoe. Minas Lami. Which one gives the shoe to which one? Boaz Nosan Lagal. Boaz, who in this case is, let's see, Boaz wants to acquire Ruth and her property, right? So he is the buyer, and so Boaz, the buyer, gave his shoe to the Goel, to the other guy, the Ploni Almoni. Rabbi Yehuda says Goel Nosan Laboaz. No, he says the other way around. So that's the machlokas that we have between Rav and Levi. Who gives the chalipin to who? Who gives the symbolic handkerchief to who? Tana. So we don't resolve that. Tana, we have a brisa. Konin b'kli. Alpha pisha ein bo shava pruta. You can do a chalipin with a utensil, even though it doesn't have any value, right? A very cheap utensil, it still works. Amar of Nachman says l'shanu el b'kli. Now that's only if it's actually a kli, a utensil level, but pere low. But some object which is not a kli, so it doesn't have that utility. If it doesn't have that utility and it's also not worth a pruta, then you can't. It doesn't work. Then you can't. It has no value and also has no utility. It's not good for chalipin. Roshesha says no, it doesn't matter. It could be a kli, it can be peros. It doesn't have to be worth anything.
Well, we say payload is worth something, though, right? You're acquiring the fruit. You acquire an orchard.
Yeah, but what if it's a very small amount that's not even worth a penny? I mean, there are things that are not shava pruta, right? Like, what things do you think those are? By pere, it doesn't necessarily mean fruit or produce, by the way. I think it means anything that's not a kli.
We were talking in the Mishnah in the very beginning. We're holding the whole discussion. What's considered peri, whether it's gold, whether it's fruit, whether it's hot. So you'd think earlier on that peri is something substantial. He's acquiring that object, whether it's a cow, whether it's gold, whether it's what. The whole concept peri, we're thinking it's an actual transaction of something of value. To hear now interject peri means something different. it's a little, it's,
Surprise. You're surprised.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
I accept your surprise. That's a reasonable point. But we have,
they do that. They do it a lot. The text of the Torah says that menorah has to be made of pure gold. The halakha is not like that. There are lots of examples of like that. I just gave one.
I accept your surprise, but now we've gotten to this point.
Mhm.
My time Rav Nachman, what's Rav Nachman's reason? Amar Kra Na'alo, because the pasuk that we just quoted says he handed over a shoe. A shoe is a kli. Na'alin, a shoe or works, or something like a shoe, something that's a kli. But if it's not a kli, it doesn't work. If it's again, if it's valueless. My time Rav Sheshes, and why does Rav Sheshes argue? Amar Kra L'Kayem Kol Davar, because it says this is what you do to affect anything. Now, it's not really the plain meaning of the pasuk, but I guess by including this extra clause to establish anything, any event or any transaction, he understands that the pasuk means to include, even if you use anything, even if it's of little value. So Rav Nachman Name Haksiv L'chaim Kol Davar, but how does Rav Nachman understand that phrase? How L'chaim Kol Davar Niknim Minal? That's the straight meaning of the pasuk. It's not referring to the shoe that it could be anything. The shoe has to be something, right? But it's to affect the transfer of anything. You have to use a shoe. Rav Sheshes or any kli. Rav Sheshes Name Haksiv Nalo. So how does Rav Sheshes explain, like, why do they use a shoe? Right, which is a kli. Manalo davar hamasuyam. I've called davar hamasuyam because it has to be a whole thing. Okay, so it could be anything, even if it's not a kli, but you can't use a half thing to do this kinyan. Let's say you have a nut, right? A walnut. So let's say a walnut is not worth a pruta. Walnuts are pretty expensive, but okay, maybe walnuts are cheap. So even though you don't need it to be worth a pruta, but you can't use half a walnut. You have to use at least a whole walnut. Okay. Amar Sheshes, Breder Avidi, it just says, Kamanks Kasvinan Ha'itna. So according to our current practice, which is that you write in the contract, B'mana de kasher limkanayabe, that I've effected this transaction with something that's suitable for acquisition. So since we use that language B'mana with a thing, Amana he understands as a utensil, a kli. Lapuke mi Rav Sheshes, the Amar Kani B'Peros, who this would not be like Rav Sheshes, this practice, because Rav Sheshes says it doesn't have to be a kli. The kasher. Because this is the practice we have with our contracts means that it's okay to use a sorry, so the Sor of Shesha says it's okay to use a non-kli, but our practice is to write that it has to be a kli. Lapuket is Shmuel. I'm sorry. So the kasher that we say b'mana the kasher lemiknayabe, a kli that is suitable, right? Lapukim in Shmuel the Amarkonim, b'meroka. Shmuel says that you can even use a kli that's made of cow dung, right? So like hardened cow dung, obviously something that is that's revolting, and so it's not a mana de kasha lemikniave. It's not something that is suitable to use. And lemiknaya, it says mana kasha lemiknaya, something that's suitable to affect the kinyan with. That excludes Levi. Levi says that it's the seller's item you use for a kinyan sudar. By the Lemiknaya, it implies to effect the transaction and not to transfer. Okay, so in other words, so that somehow this language implies that it's the buyer's item they use for chalipin, and they with it to affect the transfer with it. Rav Papa Amar Lamute Matbea. That means that is excluding a coin. Okay. Rashi explains like with it, but not with something else, not with the value of the coin. It has to be something that you're allowed to use, right? So something that you're not allowed to use is excluded by this word bay. Okay. If some say bay, Amar of Papa Lamute Matbeya, the kosher. So another version is that Rav Papa says the same thing. That excludes coins. You can't use coins for the kinyan. And the kasher for the word that it's suitable. Amar Zviji Tamer Rashi Lumute Isure Hana. Aval Mariko Lo Yistrich. This version tells you the word the kosher, that's what excludes things that are asar b'hana. Mariko Istrich, you don't even need to, like, it's obvious that you can't use something revolting like as the chalipin. That would be that you don't even need to be specified by the pasuk. Okay. Simon back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says a token can acquire a coin, right? What does that mean? Maya Simon. So we didn't explain yet what is this token. Amar Rav, so when you go into the bathhouse, you pay the fee to everybody pays a different fee at the spa, depending if you're getting the manicure or the pedicure or the massage, right? But they need to know, like, how many people came in today. We need to know how much hot water we need, how many towels we need, right? So they use tokens to count the number of people that came in through the door that day. So these are not things of value. It's not like the fee is paid separately, right? The token is just a device for counting people. It doesn't have value. Meisvei. So they ask the question, Ein Mechalin Master Sheni Al Simon, V'lo Amos Anitonos B'Simon L'Veis Arechats. This Brisa says, when it comes to redeeming Maser Sheni, so with Maser Sheni, you're out in the countryside, and the year of Maser Sheni, you have to take a tenth and bring it to Yerushalayim and consume it there. And if you don't feel like schlepping the produce, you redeem it against money, and you bring the money to Yerushalayim and go out to a nice restaurant.
This halakha that they just stated appears 6 times in Shas.
Okay. And you know that because you remember all of them, or you just
because I noted that they actually derive it as say it's deraita, but it's another problem because coins didn't exist at the time of Matan Torah. But there's another opinion in 3 of the locations that are contrary. And I think one of them's coming up.
Okay, so anyway, this Brisa distinguishes. There's 2 clauses here, right? You can't redeem Maser Sheni onto a simon, a token, and you can't do it onto the thing that's used to count people in the bathhouse. So it means that the simon, the token, is a different kind of thing, right? Because it refers to them separately. So what is the token? So clearly the asimon is not this kind of token that they use in the bathhouse. So what is it? Maybe you want to say, no, it's not saying they're 2 separate things. It's explaining you can't use an asimon, this token, which is the thing that you use to count people in the bathhouse. No, you can't say that because we have another version, another brisa. We have another brisa, which is explicitly that they're separate. Rabbi Dosa says you can redeem Maser Sheni on this token. The rabbis say you cannot. Shavin, but they agree. They agree about the bathhouse token that you can use it, right? So here clearly it has to be a different thing because on the one thing on the bathhouse token they agree, but on the asimon, which we're trying to figure out what that is, they don't agree. So clearly those are 2 different things. Rav Yochanan says, "My asimon, what is this asimon? This token pulsa? It's a slug, okay, a coin that hasn't been minted yet, okay." The Azra Rabbi Yochanan Tame, Rabbi Yochanan is consistent. Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Dosa, Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Davar Echad. Rabbi Dosa and Rabbi Shmuel agreed on one thing. Rabbi Dosa had the Amar. Rabbi Dosa is what we just said about. Which one was Rabbi Dosa? Second.
Rabbi
Oh,
does say
oh yeah,
you can
Rabbi does
redeem-
that you can redeem Master Sheni onto this Asibar. Rabbi Shmuel Mahi, and what's Rabbi Shmuel's agreement with this? The Tanya, we have a brayso talking about Master Sheni. You tie up the money in your hand. The Rabbos kol davar hanis for biyad. Anything that you can put in your wallet, basically, is okay for Master Sheni in your purse. You have Rabbi Shmuel, that's what Rabbi Shmuel says. So basically, he's agreeing that you can use the asimon because it's a coin that you can put in your purse. And the image of tying up your tokens in a bag just brings me back to the days when I was a student in Israel, and the way you operated the payphone, as I'm sure you all remember, was an asimon, right? It was a particular token that you would slide into the payphone, and if you wanted to call overseas, you needed a lot of asimonim. So I carried them, you go to the post office and buy, dozens and dozens of these things, and you'd put them in a little bag so you'd have them handy when you wanted to use the phone.
So elsewhere, they interpret a pasuk as saying that there has to be a face on the coin, which is really interesting because there has never been a Jewish coin with someone's face
With
on
the
it.
face, right? Yeah.
And my suspicion is that was instituted after the Bar Kokhba revolt, because the Bar Kokhba leaders did mint coins, and to mint your own coins without authority of the government, even today, is considered to be an act of rebellion. And they wanted to end any possibility of another catastrophe like that. That's my theory.
That's what Rabbi Akiva's coming to me. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Shmuel. It means l'rabos kol davar sheish lo tzura, anything that has an image on it. That's what a coin is that you can use for Maser Sheni.
Yeah, I think the
Okay.
halakha is according to Rabbi Akiva, which means you cannot use any Jewish coin to redeem Maser Sheni.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's never
Yeah.
been, we've never found a Jewish coin that had somebody's face on it.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Not the Hasmonean coins, not the Herodian coins, not the Bar Kokhba coins, not the coins of modern Medina Israel.
I wonder if that had anything to do with like an extension of Avodah Zarah, or having images of I don't know.
Originally, that's
Interesting.
probably what it was. They have some of them have fruits on them. The four species appear fairly often in ancient Jewish coins, for instance, but never somebody's head.
And when does the menorah show up? Is that
That was
Roman?
also about that time. I don't know exactly who did it. It might have been a Hasmonean coin. I have to look that up.
Okay.
And the menorahs and the coins all have curved branches.
Okay, next part of the Mishnah. If the buyer took the peros, the item being bought, and didn't hand over the money, then nobody can back out, right? Once you've taken possession, the sale is finalized. This is a biblical rule, right? The Doraisa rule that once you hand over the money, the rule is that once you hand over the money, that's when the sale takes effect. Why did the rabbis institute this idea that it's the taking possession of the item, that's what establishes the transaction? So that the seller won't say, "Oh, you handed over the money, and now it's time to collect your stuff." Guess what? It just went up in flames. But I already took the money. The sale, when it burned, it was already yours because I took the money already. In order to forestall that, the rabbi said that the transaction doesn't take effect until the seller takes possession. So Gemara says, "Sof man the shada deleka abai shalule." Like somebody's responsible for this fire. So what do you care if he owes the buyer or the seller, right? Alexera shema tipo deleka ba'onis. Oh, maybe it wasn't arson. Maybe it was an accidental fire, and then there's nobody who's going to pay the damages. So then that's why the rabbis, so imak must labor should say, if you say that the that once you hand over the money, the ownership transfers to the buyer, then Masar Nafshe Tarchu Matzil, then the 1 second. Yeah, if you say it's still the seller's, then the seller who's like the stuff is in his house, right, or is in his property, right? So he's the one with the opportunity to keep it safe from fire, right? So if you tell the seller, listen, you haven't sold this thing yet, you may have accepted the money, but the buyer didn't take possession yet. It's still yours, and you better go put out the fire, right? You're gonna make more effort to put out the fire because you think because it is yours still. Velo, but if you don't say that, then okay, so there's a fire. It's not my stuff. Why should I care? Reish Lakish Amar, but Reish Lakish has a different view. Mashicha Mefarashes Minas Torah. No, this idea that taking possession affects the transaction, that's a Torah law. My Tama Reish Lakish, where does he get this from? Amar Kara, Torah says, V'chitim krumim kar lamisecha, o kano miyad lamisecha. If you sell something to your friend or buy it from your friend. Davar hanikna miyad liyad. By using kano miyad amisecha, buying something from the hand of your friend, means it's something that passes from hand to hand, and so that it's an explicit reference to the handing over, the taking possession of the item being sold. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. So how does Rabbi Yochanan explain this? Miyad l'mute karka. No, Rabbi Yochanan says this just tells you we're talking about movable objects, something that you can hold in your hand, not real property, not real estate. And it tells you that that parsha is about overcharging. So it tells you that only something that is movable is subject to overcharging, but real estate there is not subject to overcharging because it can have hidden value or different value to different people or whatever the reason is. There's no the rule of Onah that the Torah is talking about that only applies miyad to something that can be held in your hand. For Reish Lakish, how does Reish Lakish? Why doesn't he accept that? Like, why does the Torah? Why is it so verbose? Right? It has two clauses in the sentence. If you sell something, or buy something, right? It could have just, if it was just trying to tell you that we're talking about about movable property, it could have combined those phrases into two phrases saying if you sell something from from hand to hand, right? Oh, kanolamali. Why is it split into two clauses? Mashicha tells you what I think it tells you, that it's telling you that it's something that Mashicha applies to, meaning that Mashicha is envisioned by the Torah as the acquisition mechanism. Rabbi Yochanan, how does Rabbi Yochanan explain that? Oh, kanomai avilei. Rav Yochanan, what does he do with this expression, O kanomi amisach? In other words, why the extra clause in the sentence? You need it for the following brisa. Referring to this pasuk, that when you sell something, don't overcharge. That only tells you that you can't overcharge the buyer. Nisana mocher minayin. How do you know that you can't undercharge, or that like the buyer can't underpay? By saying that the parsha Bava replies to v'chitim kru, to the seller, okano, or to the buyer. You can't exceed the bounds of too much, the bounds of the actual value. Reish Lakish. So does Reish Lakish agree with that the buyer can't underpay? Tarte gamer minay. You can use the same phrase for both things, okay, which is kind of a desperate, it sounds a little desperate to me because the Gemara rarely does that, right? Usually it goes down, every letter has to be accounted for, teaching one or the other rule, but sometimes it just throws up its hands and says, yeah, you can learn both things from this.
So are we saying that the Mashiach is D'oraisa or not? Earlier we wanted to say that it's not, it's the Rabbanan. So what's the Maskana here?
It's a machlokas, right? Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have maskana yet, but we're not done yet.
Oh.
Tanan, we have Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol Kesef Biado, whoever has the money, Yodo Yona, he's got the advantage. Mocher Hu Dematzi Hadarbe. In other words, the seller is the one that can back out of the deal. Lokeach lo matzi hadarbe. But the buyer, once he's handed over the money, he can't back out. Now, how does this work? If you say that the Kenyan was affected by taking the money, right? That's why the seller can back out. And lokeach lo matzi hadarbe. And the money, the seller can always give back the money, but the buyer, once he's handed over the money, it's done. I mean, they can always agree, right, to reverse the transaction, but we're obviously talking about a case where there's a dispute. But if you say that the money is not what affects the Kenyan, but it has to be the Mashiach, if the Mashiach hasn't been done yet, then either party can back out, right? Reish Lakish could answer, Aliba de Rabbi Shimon lo kamina. I'm not talking about Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, yes, it's clear from that Mishnah that Rabbi Shimon says it's the money, not the Mashiach. But Kikamina Liba the Rabbanon. I'm talking about the Rabbanon, the rabbis. When I say that Mashiach is the Kinyan from Minat Torah, I mean according to the Rav. That's the rabbi's opinion, not Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Okay. So Bishlam Rish Lakish. So I understand according to Rish Lakish, Hainadika ben Rabbi Shimon Rabbanon. Okay, so that's the argument between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. El Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, my Ika ben Rabbi Shimon Rabbanon. What's the the basis of their argument? Rav Chisda. What the basis of their argument is what Rav Chisda taught. Yeah, Rav Chisda, Kederach shetiknu Mashicha b'malchrin, kachni tiknu Mashicha b'lakuchos. He applies this idea that the rabbis instituted the requirement of taking possession. That requirement of a sale also applies to Mashicha for the buyer, right? And Rav Shimon leislei de Rav Chisda, Rabban nisle Rav Chisda. So Rav Shimon doesn't accept Rav Chisda. He says it's only the seller needs to do Mashicha, but the rabbis say no, the buyer also needs to do Mashicha.
Wait a minute, Rabbi Shimon was before Rav Chisda.
Yeah,
Rav Chisda was in Amora.
Okay, but Rav Chisda is
he's not instituting a rule. He's explaining a previous rule. He says Kederach shetiknu. This is how they. This was what the original rule was that Reb Shimon and the rabbis are fighting about. Second. Okay. All right. Let's stop here for today. Pick it up tomorrow.
Yashikach.
You all tomorrow.
Thank you.